Okay, so full disclosure, I'm in a bit of a reading slump myself lately. I
Hmm.
start books, get distracted, and they just end up on that to be read pile on my nightstand. You know the one.
Oh, I know that pale well.
Yeah. So when I saw these articles you sent over, 10 ways of how to make reading fun and free romance novels to read online, I was like, okay, let's dive in. Maybe there's something here to like reignite our love for reading.
You know what struck me? Both articles, they both just cut to the chase and say, reading shouldn't feel like a chore. It's like they're giving us permission to silence that voice in our heads that says we should be reading more classics or,
Yeah.
hitting some arbitrary number of books per month.
Yeah. It's about the joy of getting lost in a good book, right? And one of the tips that really stood out to me was genre hopping.
Hmm.
Like, is it really that simple? Can trying a new genre actually make reading fun again?
It can. Our brains, they crave novelty. Think about it. If you're always reading the same type of book, it's like listening to the same song over and over. Eventually, it just loses its effect.
Right.
But when you switch genres, it's like hitting refresh on your reading experience.
Hmm.
You know those recommendation algorithms we all rely on?
Oh, tell me about it.
They can trap us in this echo chamber of familiar stories. And breaking free from that, exploring different genres, that can actually make us more well-rounded, I think.
I like that, breaking free from the algorithm. It's like ditching your usual routine for a bit, trying something new. And speaking of new experiences, both articles also talk about the social side of reading, like joining a book club or even just chatting about a book with a friend. But honestly, I'm more of an introvert. Does sharing your reading experience really make it that much better?
You'd be surprised. There's actually a lot of research on this. Studies show that discussing a book, even with just one other person, it can really help you understand and remember what you read. It's like our brains are wired to process information better when we actually talk about it with someone.
Interesting. So it's like the difference between watching a movie alone on your couch versus with friends, where you're sharing the laughs, the scares, the whole experience.
Exactly. And let's be real, sometimes it's just fun to geek out with someone who gets it.
Totally. But okay, there's one tip I got to ask about. One article suggests read with a pet. Am I missing something here? Is this some next level reading hack?
Okay, I'll admit that one made me chuckle too. But there might be something to it. Pets, they're great stress relievers, and studies have shown that having them around can actually improve focus.
Wait, are you serious? So my cat, who insists on sitting on every book I open, that's actually like helping me focus.
Well, maybe not helping exactly. It's more about creating a calm, comfy atmosphere where you can relax and get lost in the book.
Hmm. Interesting. So we've got genre hopping, social reading, and now pet-assisted literature. But one thing I noticed is these articles seem to be for everyone, right? Like there's tips for kids and adults all mixed together. What's up with that?
You're right, it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing, is it? Just like anything else, you have to think about the reader's age, their personality, even their history with reading. What works for a kid who hates reading is going to be totally different from what an adult who's just burnt out needs.
Yeah, that makes sense. Speaking of things that can be both amazing and kind of overwhelming,
Yeah.
can we address the elephant in the room? Or I guess the phone in our pocket.
Ah, yes. Technology, the double-edged sword of the reading world.
Right. On one hand, we have access to more books than ever, but then on the other hand,
It's a constant source of distraction.
totally, it's kind of ironic, right? Both articles are filled with ads and links, all these things competing for our attention,
Hmm.
even though they're supposed to be about the joys of reading.
It's like they're, I don't know, daring us to resist the pull of the internet.
Exactly. So how do we do that? How do we actually focus on reading in this digital world?
Well, I think that's where these articles, even with all their distractions, they offer a good lesson.
Okay, I'm listening.
It's all about being intentional. We have to be mindful of how and when we use technology, especially when it comes to reading.
So you're saying we shouldn't like give up on tech entirely?
Not necessarily, but we got to set boundaries, create these tech-free zones where we can actually lose ourselves in a book.
I like that. Tech-free zones. So maybe that means silencing notifications, putting your phone in another room, or even using apps that like block distracting websites.
Exactly. It's about finding what works for you.
It's funny, the more we talk about this, the more I realize this is really about self-awareness, isn't it?
What do you mean?
Like being aware of our own habits, the things that pull us away from reading, and the things that draw us back in.
You're absolutely right. And being open to experimenting. Maybe reading with a pet isn't your thing, but maybe listening to an audiobook while you're outside helps you relax and connect with the story. Or joining an online book club introduces you to new genres you'd never read on your own. It's about finding your own way back to enjoying reading.
I love that, finding your own way. It's not about following some strict set of rules. It's about rediscovering the joy of reading in a way that works for you. So, as we dig deeper into these articles, what are some key takeaways for our listeners who, like me, are looking to fall back in love with reading?
That's the fun part, right? Taking these ideas, the brain science, the social stuff, even the pet thing, and figuring out what clicks for you as a reader.
Exactly. It's like we've got this whole toolbox now, but we get to pick which tools we use.
Yeah.
And speaking of tailoring things, one thing that stood out to me was how different the advice was for kids versus adults.
Mm-hmm.
Like for kids, it's all about making reading fun and engaging, but for adults, it's more about setting goals and making time.
Right, and there's a reason for that. With kids, you're trying to build that lifelong love of books. If you make it a chore, too early worksheets, book reports, all that, it can backfire. They might just start avoiding reading altogether.
Ugh, tell me about it. I still remember slogging through Moby Dick in 8th grade.
Yeah.
Not exactly my favorite reading memory.
Exactly. And that's why finding ways to make reading fun for kids is so important. Like, think interactive books, reading aloud with funny voices, letting them choose books based on what they're interested in. It's all about sparking that curiosity and making it relevant to their lives.
It's like you wouldn't drag a kid to a museum and force them to stare at one painting, right? Let them wander, explore, find what catches their eye. One exhibit might spark a lifelong passion, while another one, they just walk right by. And speaking of things that can be captivating and overwhelming, we talked about technology earlier, but I feel like we need to go a little deeper on that one.
Oh, yeah. It's a rabbit hole for sure. One minute you're reading an article about books, the next you're 3 hours deep into some Wikipedia spiral about who even knows what. Seriously. It's almost funny, right? These articles talking about focused reading, well, they're surrounded by distractions. Ads, links, notifications. It's like they're testing us, seeing if we can resist the siren call of the internet.
It's the ultimate paradox. We have more information than ever at our fingertips, but it's harder than ever to actually focus and absorb it all. And this is where I think those articles, even with all the distractions around them, actually offer a really important insight.
And what's that?
Intentionality. We have to be mindful about how and when we engage with technology, especially when it comes to reading.
So not giving up on tech completely then.
Not necessarily, but setting boundaries. Creating those spaces where we can truly disconnect and immerse ourselves in a book without the constant pings and notifications pulling us away. I like that. Creating those spaces, so that could be silencing your phone, putting it in another room, even using apps to block distracting websites, right?
Exactly. It's all about finding what works for you.
You know, the more we talk about this, the more I'm realizing how much of this comes down to just being aware, aware of our own habits, the things that pull us away from reading and the things that help us get back to it.
Totally. And being willing to experiment a little. Maybe reading with a pet isn't your thing, but maybe listening to an audiobook while you're out in nature helps you relax and connect. Or maybe joining an online book club exposes you to new genres you'd never even think of on your own. It's all about finding your own way back to enjoying reading.
Finding your own way. I love that. So it's not about following some rigid set of rules. It's about rediscovering that magic of reading in a way that works for you. So as we're exploring all these ideas from the articles, what are some of the biggest takeaways for our listeners who, just like me, are trying to fall back in love with reading?
You know, it's funny how these articles, at first glance, they just seemed like simple listicles with a few quick tips, right? But the more we talk about them, the more I realize we're actually having this deeper conversation about our whole relationship with reading, especially in today's world.
It really is deeper than it looks at first, isn't it? It's not just about reading itself, but about understanding. Why do we read the way we do? How does technology affect that? And what about the social aspect? Does that help or hurt? It's like we've been on this archaeological dig, brushing away the surface to uncover all these fascinating things about how we connect with stories and why reading still matters so much, even in a world full of distractions.
And the best part is, there's no right answer. What works for one person might not work for another. It's about taking these ideas we've talked about, the genre hopping, the pet thing, tech-free zones, and experimenting, figuring out what feels right for you as a reader.
I love that. It's
Yeah.
like we've been handed the key to a secret garden, right? The garden's there, full of all these amazing stories, but we have to find the gate, unlock it, and actually step inside.
Exactly.
And who knows, maybe we'll discover this whole genre we never knew we loved. Or we'll stumble upon the perfect spot to swap book recommendations with a friend, or even our pet.
That's what makes it fun. Reading is this journey. It's always changing, and sometimes all it takes is a little nudge. to remind us of the magic that a good book can hold.
So well said. As we wrap up this deep dive, if you could give our listeners just one thing, one actionable step to rediscover that joy of reading, what would it be?
Honestly, just pick up a book, any book. Maybe it's that one you've been putting off for ages, or something completely new, a genre you've been curious about. Put aside 15 minutes, silence your phone, and just get lost in the story. You never know where it might take you.
I love that. No matter how crazy life gets, we can always make time for a little escape. Thanks for diving into all this with me today, and to everyone listening. Happy reading.